Well, we are still in the season of Easter, and we are still wrapping our heads around the meaning of resurrection. This story of Jesus' resurrection is really a story about embracing life, this messy, dangerous, scarred up life. And it's also a story about walking together through it all. So we pick up our story today when two of the disciples are headed from Jerusalem to Emmaus. It may be about a 2-hour walk, and they're doing what people do when they don't know what to do, talking, taking a long walk, trying to figure things out. Now, Todd Weir suggests that walks like this restore the balance of the soul. Lives are shared and complaints are released to the wind, and hidden fears become open insight, and burdens are shared, and questions are asked, and reality checked, and evasions give way to revelation, and hearts heal, and ideas flow, and plans are made. Compassion is rekindled, harmony is restored. We realize that change is possible. That's how it goes on long walks with a good friend. And this is where Jesus meets these confused and grieving friends, because it's the third day after Jesus was killed and then buried, and these men are walking away from that tragic scene, and they're on their way just to a small town where they can rest and think. And Jesus begins to walk with them, unrecognized, a seeming stranger. And he lets them share their story with all the sordid details. When they reach their home, well, they extend hospitality to invite this stranger, this very kind, patient stranger, to stay for dinner. And then we hear the words that are familiar to us. When he was at the table with them, he took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And suddenly, in this moment, with these words, they realized this was him. And in all the excitement, he slips from their sight. So they run to tell the rest of their friends what has happened, because, that's what you do when you have exciting, unbelievable news to share. And then when they're all together again sharing these stories, Jesus shows up. And again, they thought, well, maybe he was a ghost, and he can see that in their eyes. And so he says again, look at my hands and my feet. You can see that it is me, myself. Touch me and see. For a ghost does not have flesh and blood as I have. And then he asks for some food, and he shares some roasted fish with them. And one more time, they get to hear those calming, reassuring words, peace be with you. They can begin to relax. This is a very physical story with scarred up hands and feet and long walks and good food shared. There's a reason for this. Luke, writing down all these memories, is wanting to say very clearly that the resurrected Jesus is not a ghost, is not a disembodied spirit, but is a physical being. And as Colin mentioned last week, there was a belief in that time that God could not really become a human being in the person of Jesus. For the idea was that all of flesh is evil. So God could not become flesh and blood. With the material, the physical world was inferior to the spiritual world. It was important to Luke to reaffirm the humanity of Jesus in order to refute that argument. And why is that important? Because if human flesh are evil and inferior, then the goal of our life would just be to escape from this world into the realm of the spirit. It would follow logically that we should just ignore the physical aspects of life in this world and focus all of our attention on the spiritual matters as if they were two completely different things. But with this kind of belief, well, then the physical suffering and the pain of human life, the hunger, the disease, the injustice, well, it could be ignored by the church. But no, Luke wants to make it clear that the physical, earthly, flesh and blood world is real and valuable and spiritual. Real and valuable enough for God to inhabit the person of Jesus of Nazareth and to be here in flesh and blood in the body of the risen Lord. Luke's description puts the risen Christ right back into our world. See my hands, touch my feet, touch me and know. Now, Debbie Thomas describes this truth beautifully and why it's so important. She says, I love this story for the way that it grounds divine revelation in the concrete and the ordinary. It is in the presence of skin and bone and taste buds and nerve endings that the disciples come to faith. All of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances in the Gospels center on the physical. Jesus does not manifest as a disembodied voice that waxes eloquent on the philosophical implications of death and life. He shows up with hands and feet, scars and wounds, and says, "This is I myself." He tells his disciples as they struggle to reorder all that they know about life and death and souls and bodies with this astonishing appearance, "This is I myself, the one that you know, the one that you trust, the one that you love. You can touch me and see." Reverend Thomas continues, I know that it might be unfashionable to need the resurrection. Isn't this the criticism so often leveled at Christians, that our faith is a crutch and an opiate, a refusal to face the harsher aspects of reality? But here I will bear witness that I need Jesus' bodily resurrection precisely because I too am embodied. And so I need a Savior with a body like mine, a body that adores and celebrates, but also a body that fails and ages and aches and breaks and dies. A body that carries wounds and scars, visible and invisible. A body that is profoundly vulnerable to forces beyond my ability to control. A body that is, for the most part, defenseless against injury or violence or illness or injustice and cruelty. I have a body that might die just as Jesus himself died, too soon and away from loved ones and in random, inexplicable, traumatic circumstances. I need a God who resurrects bodies, a God who honors and even revels in physicality, who sees the danger and the damage so often enacted in human flesh, and yet a God who declares with absolute authority and credibility that our endings here are not the end. For me, the physical resurrection of Jesus is God's definitive offering of both compassion and justice. All that has been taken, all that has been broken and forgotten will be restored. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote, "Only a suffering God can help." A prison guard found a piece of paper with his line scribbled on it in his prison cell before his death. The painful experiences of life leave scars, scars that become a part of who we are. As Barbara Brown Taylor writes, "Now wounded and bruised, the same hands and feet of Jesus were proof to the disciples that he had gone through the dangers, not around it." Through the danger and not around. Much of our time and energy is spent on finding ways around the painful things rather than living through them. We don't want to experience pain or danger or even come face to face with the suffering of other people or the suffering of the earth. And yet that is exactly what our faith asks of us. We are called to be the body, the image of the risen Christ in the world today. Celeste Kendall-Shank agrees, saying, I live with chronic illness, and I need a Redeemer who has a body like mine, with wounds, both visible and hidden to the naked eye. I need a Messiah with whom even death is not the final limit for these bodies in which, through God, we live and move and have our being. Though I think most of us, probably all of us, would prefer to be known to others by our best features, our strong nose, our confident smile. We are truly known when we allow people to see our wounds. So what scars do you have? You might have scars on your hands that tell a particular story. I suspect that most of our scars and wounds are less visible, easier to hide from the outside. But it is when we are willing to share them that we are truly known. When we tell the stories of what happened to us and how we have come through the worst and been changed, hopefully for the better. When we are open and vulnerable, that is when a space is opened for the grace of God to come in. That is when true community is formed and where lives are transformed. When we hold out our wounded hands and hearts for others to see and touch the scars, we create a safe place for them to stop pretending that everything is always just fine. And like Jesus, we invite others to let go of their fear and their shame so that we can walk this road of healing together. I love this story about walking together. For we, in our time, well, we can sometimes feel the presence of Christ when we're walking together. You just might, when you're with someone, feel your soul burning within you because you connect in ways you weren't expecting, in ways you can't describe, and you know that God is here in this moment, and we are walking on holy ground. But it is also true that walking this life together might actually happen sitting down. It might be sitting in a wheelchair with someone pushing you into a room with others to share those stories that help us, well, make difficult choices and feel the peace of God that passes all understanding. Might be sitting in the living room or on the front porch, sharing the stories of joys and pains. In those moments, we are, in fact, walking the path of life together. God is most present. God's transforming love is available and evident in our acts of listening and sharing our stories. Not just telling people what we think they need to do to be better or Christian or how they need to get their act together. It's when we invite others into our lives, being vulnerable, sharing our stories and sharing our scars over good food and drink. It's in those moments that God is made visible to those who need love most, which is all of us. So maybe now, in our day, in our time, when the world looks at us to see if we are real, to see if the Jesus that we love and the faith that we profess is real and approachable and trustworthy, they need to see our scars more than our piety. They need to see our vulnerability, not our certainty. Wounds are not pretty. And no, they don't tell the whole story of our journey, but the stories that they do tell are holy. Jesus did not hide the bloody and the broken, and neither should we.